Before we unveil this incredible tale, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. We'd love to connect with you. In a tranquil corner of suburban Atlanta, an ordinary afternoon unfolded in a city park. A young black boy, Malik, who lived with his blind grandmother, was engrossed in a book on a weathered bench. Suddenly, a ferocious growl shattered the peace. A large, unleashed dog was charging directly at a small girl. Without a moment's hesitation, Malik sprang into action, using his own body as a shield. He sustained severe injuries, unaware that the girl's father, a renowned musician, would transform his quiet act of courage into a song that would resonate across the entire nation. It was a serene afternoon in the Atlanta outskirts, the air a gentle lullaby as golden leaves drifted from the ancient maple trees, settling softly onto the winding paths of the old city park. At this hour the park was rarely bustling, just a few elderly individuals on their leisurely strolls, some children with their nannies, and the occasional jogger lost in their music. Yet, nestled on a corner bench beneath a grand oak, a boy named Malik appeared like clockwork every afternoon. Malik was a slender, contemplative 11-year-old, his skin like polished mahogany, his eyes reflecting an intelligence far beyond his years. Dressed in clean but faded hand-me-downs, he always carried a worn leather book, its pages curled and filled with his scribbled notes. Like many days, he sat cross-legged, quietly reading aloud for his grandmother, Miss Loretta. Though blind, she insisted she could see the soul of a story just fine, as long as Malik was the narrator. Miss Loretta had been Malik's guardian since he was 3, after his parents were tragically lost in a car accident on a rainy night he barely recalled. Her silver hair shimmered like the first light of dawn, and despite her slow gait and reliance on a cane, she possessed the quiet strength of someone who had faced adversity and embraced it without bitterness. Each afternoon, Malik would carefully guide her to their favorite bench, read from a book he'd found at the church thrift store, and then escort her home before dusk. They had little, a modest wooden house on the edge of the neighborhood with a backyard full of overgrown marigolds, but they had their cherished ritual and most importantly each other. Not far from Malik, a little girl with golden curls skipped across stepping stones near the fountain. No older than 8, she wore a pale yellow dress and tiny white sneakers that gleamed like new pennies. This was Lily Whitmore. Though she had only moved into the neighborhood 2 weeks prior, she remained a mystery to other children, rarely seen outdoors. Her father, James Whitmore, a world-famous musician who had retreated from the public eye after his wife's passing, had brought Lily here to escape the world's clamor and the painful echoes of a house filled with memories. Lily had noticed Malik before, once from a car window as they passed the park, another time from the balcony of their rented house overlooking the southern woods. There was something about the way he held his book, the musical cadence of his voice as he read to Miss Loretta, that drew her closer each day. She'd hide behind benches, feign chasing butterflies, anything just to listen a little longer. She admired how he articulated each word as if every syllable held a heart. Though they had never exchanged more than a glance in the secret chambers of her young heart, she had decided he was like the noble, quiet, perhaps even magical boys from her mother's fairy tales. That afternoon as the sun dipped, painting the park in amber and rose hues, Malik read a passage about a brave knight. Lily, nearby, sat cross-legged pretending to stack acorns, but her ears were keenly attuned to his voice. Miss Loretta, a soft smile gracing her lips, tilted her head back as if gazing at the clouds she could no longer see. A gentle breeze rustled and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. But this tranquility was fleeting. Not all stories unfold gently. Some arrive with a snarl. And that snarl was closer than anyone knew. A low, guttural growl, like the distant rumble of an approaching storm, erupted from the far end of the path. It sliced through the park's hush, an unnatural jarring sound. Malik instinctively lowered his book, his brow furrowed as he turned his head. Miss Loretta's smile faltered. "Malik, what is that sound?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. But Malik didn't respond immediately. His gaze was already fixed on the blur of motion near the hedge, where the walking trail curved sharply behind the fountain. His breath hitched. A powerful Rottweiler, all muscle and wild-eyed panic, had slipped its leash. Likely from one of the nearby gated homes where dogs were bought for security, not companionship, it now barreled down the path, a loose chain swinging, foam flecking its mouth. Adults scattered, grabbing children, knocking over coffee cups and bags. Pigeons exploded into flight. But amidst the sudden chaos, one figure remained frozen: Lily. Small, wide-eyed, utterly oblivious to the danger hurtling towards her. She had stood to observe squirrels when the world around her erupted. She turned just in time to see the charging dog, and fear seemed to weld her shoes to the ground. Her mouth opened but no sound emerged. Her arms hung limp. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply stared. Malik didn't think. He didn't glance around for others, didn't call for help, didn't hesitate for even half a breath. He dropped his book, its pages fanning out like broken wings, and sprinted down the path, his sneakers slapping a frantic rhythm against the concrete. Miss Loretta called out, confusion and panic in her voice, but it was too late. Malik moved with raw, unfiltered instinct, the kind of courage that doesn't wait to be named. He reached Lily just as the dog lunged, its paws leaving the ground in a feral arc, teeth bared, the growl now a deafening roar. He didn't shield himself. He twisted sideways, wrapping his arms around Lily, positioning his body so hers would be safely tucked behind him. The impact came a second later, a fierce blow that knocked the air from his lungs, sending both children tumbling to the grass. But Malik never let go. He rolled once, twice, until his back hit the base of the fountain, and the dog's jaws clamped down on his forearm with a force that tore a scream from his throat. Pain shot up his arm, searing and electric, but he locked his jaw and tightened his grip around Lily. She was trembling now, clinging to his shirt, sobbing into his chest, too terrified to open her eyes. The dog snarled and pulled, trying to free its teeth, tearing deeper with each jerk. Blood soaked through Malik's sleeve, dripping onto the grass. His vision blurred, his ears rang, but he didn't release her. He shifted to prevent the animal from reaching Lily's face, curling tighter, gritting his teeth so hard he thought they might crack. Somewhere in the chaos, someone shouted for help. Someone screamed for animal control. Feet pounded the path as adults scrambled, hesitated, and then a sharp whistle pierced the air, followed by the heavy thud of running boots and the clatter of a pole snapping open. A uniformed park ranger appeared with a catch pole. Within seconds, the loop snared the dog's neck, yanking it back with effort. The beast howled, fought, then was dragged away, leaving a trail of red drops and a silence thick with breathlessness. Malik lay still for a moment, his face pale, chest rising and falling in shallow gasps, while Lily, still pressed against him, cried out his name, though she had never spoken it before. Malik. Malik. She whispered between sobs, her voice cracking with the kind of guilt only children know. Guilt for not moving, for being small, for needing to be saved. He looked down at her, lips parted, eyes heavy but kind, and managed a faint smile. You're okay now. That's what matters. Then his head dropped back, eyes closing, the world fading into the sound of sirens echoing through the trees. The last thing he heard was Lily's voice, calling his name like a thread tying him to the waking world. The hospital room was hushed, save for the soft beeping of monitors and the rhythmic hiss of the oxygen valve. Malik lay motionless beneath a thin blue blanket, his right arm tightly bandaged and elevated. Faint bruises darkened his ribs, and a butterfly-shaped cut above his eyebrow had been carefully stitched by a nurse who fought back tears. His skin was pale in the fluorescent light, his small chest rising and falling with a slowness that made even the machine seem hesitant. Beside him sat Miss Loretta, her hand gently curled around his uninjured fingers, whispering prayers that trembled at the edges, prayers that sounded less like supplication and more like a conversation with someone she trusted too deeply to question. Even now, no one had inquired much about Malik when the ambulance arrived. He had no parents to call, no family contact except an elderly grandmother who politely but firmly refused to let anyone else explain what had happened, and had to be escorted into the back of a squad car. The paramedics, though efficient, seemed uncertain about the boy, about what to do with a name that didn't match any school emergency forms or insurance numbers. And so, Malik, brave and bleeding, was taken to the general ward like any child without title or attention, placed in a small corner room at the end of a hallway filled with more prominent cases, kids with worried parents pacing outside, with bright bouquets and get-well balloons crowding their windowsills. Lily, however, did not forget. She hadn't stopped shaking until hours later, tucked beneath 3 blankets in her father's arms, her cheeks still damp from crying. She didn't say much at first, just his name over and over. And when James Whitmore finally coaxed her into calm, when he offered her hot cocoa and a lullaby on the same piano he hadn't touched in months, she looked up at him with eyes too old for her age and said simply, "He saved me, Daddy." And no one even thanked him. James for a moment was speechless. He had seen the boy briefly, just as the paramedics took him away, just as his own daughter was passed into his arms. He had looked into that boy's face and seen not fear, not anger, but something far more powerful. Resolve, a quiet dignity that doesn't shout or demand attention but shines in silence like a candle in a darkened room. And he had let that moment pass. He had turned away. That night, James sat alone in his study, the fire long since cold, holding the note Lily had scribbled on her drawing pad, a crayon sketch of a curly-haired boy with a torn sleeve, arms wrapped protectively around a little girl with pigtails and frightened eyes. At the bottom, in crooked, determined letters, she had written, "Malik is a hero." He traced the name with his fingertip, then slowly stood, crossed the room and pulled open the drawer where he kept old press contacts he had tried to forget. Fame had come to him uninvited years ago, through songs that had poured from his grief like rain from a storm-heavy sky, and he had walked away from the spotlight when it began to feel more like a prison than a platform. But now, something stirred within him, something that had been dormant since the day he buried Lily's mother. A sense of duty perhaps, or just the stubborn ache to make something right. By morning the calls began, quiet at first, then a ripple, then a wave. The local hospital director received a polite but pointed inquiry about a boy named Malik, admitted after a dog attack, currently in pediatric recovery without insurance. A modest room was upgraded. A private nurse was assigned. Within hours the whispers reached the press. They didn't come because of Malik. They came because James Whitmore, the reclusive genius of 3 platinum albums and a decade-long silence, had spoken. But when they came, when the cameras rolled and questions flew, he didn't talk about himself. He told them about a boy. A boy with eyes like firelight who stepped in front of danger without promise of reward, who held no name the world would recognize, but whose heart in that moment was larger than the world had room for. And while the cameras clicked and the story spread, Malik slept on, unaware that the world beyond his small window had begun to shift. Not because he asked it to, but because for the first time in a long time, someone saw his light and refused to let it flicker. Malik awoke 2 days later to the gentle tapping of rain against the hospital window, a soft, rhythmic drumming that made the world feel distant and almost forgiving. His arm ached, not sharply but with the heavy dullness of something healing, something bruised but still present, still his. For a long moment he didn't move. He let the strange quiet settle in, so different from the creaking floors of his grandmother's house, the rustle of newspaper pages, the distant radio playing gospel hymns. Then, faintly, he heard her voice, not from a corner seat as he expected, but directly beside him, steady and warm as always, except now with a rasp of emotion she rarely allowed to show. "You came back to me, baby," Miss Loretta whispered, her fingers brushing through his curls with the trembling touch of someone who had learned to love carefully because life had taken too many things too soon. "I knew you would. I told them all you would." He turned his head slowly, still groggy, and saw her face. A little older than he remembered, perhaps a little more tired, but smiling, radiant even in the sterile white of the hospital light. He smiled back, weakly but genuinely. He wanted to ask what happened, if Lily was okay, if the dog was gone, but the words tumbled over each other in his throat, and all he could manage was a whisper of, "Are you all right?" Miss Loretta laughed then, a watery laugh that ended in a sniffle, and nodded. "I am now." But what surprised Malik more than the machines, more than the room that smelled too clean to be home, was the large envelope sitting on the table near his bed. And beside it a stack of cards, some folded in construction paper, others glittered and drawn in crayon, all addressed in different, sometimes clumsy handwriting to him. "Open it when you're ready," said a voice from the doorway, calm and rich like velvet worn smooth with time. Malik turned his head and blinked, unsure if the medication was making him dream. Standing there, hands folded, eyes soft with something that looked like reverence, was a man he had seen before. On CD covers, in television clips at the barber shop, in posters half peeled on the walls of old record stores. Whitmore. But he wasn't dressed like a celebrity. No tailored suit, no entourage, no designer sunglasses. Just a man in a gray sweater and a look that conveyed gratitude in more ways than words could carry. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner," James said, walking slowly toward the bed. "I wanted to." I just didn't know how to say what needed saying. He paused, then gently placed a small cloth-wrapped object on Malik's nightstand. That's a recorder, he explained. My daughter said you like stories. This one tells yours. And before Malik could ask what he meant, James tapped the top of the device, and it played not music, but Lily's voice, soft and a little shaky, describing what had happened. How Malik had shielded her. How he didn't run, didn't scream, how he wrapped his arms around her and said it would be all right, even when he was bleeding. Malik turned away, embarrassed, not used to being spoken about, especially not with admiration. But James leaned in, his voice low and certain. You're the bravest boy I've ever known, Malik. Braver than I ever was at your age. My daughter is alive because of you and the world needs to hear about it. At that he gestured toward the cards. They're from people all over. Some don't even know your name yet, but they will. Malik opened one with trembling hands. It was from a boy in Nebraska who had read about him in the paper and wrote, I wish I could be as brave as you someday. Another was from an elderly couple in Montana. Thank you for reminding us what courage really looks like. And another, scribbled in crayon from a girl named Emily, You're my hero. When I grow up, I want to be like you. As the rain continued outside and nurses passed quietly in the hallway, Malik sat with the cards in his lap, the words sinking in slowly like warmth spreading through frost-bitten hands. Miss Loretta leaned closer and kissed his forehead, whispering, Sometimes the world sees you when you least expect it. And in that moment, with a soft hum of gratitude surrounding him, Malik did not feel small. He did not feel forgotten. He felt, perhaps for the first time in his young life, seen and more than that, honored. In the days that followed, the hospital no longer felt like a place of cold bed sheets and quiet suffering, but rather something softer, like a threshold, like the pause in a song just before the melody changes. Word of Malik's bravery spread far beyond Atlanta's sleepy neighborhoods, carried by whispers that turned into news segments, which turned into radio tributes and morning talk show mentions. But none of that changed how Malik woke up each morning, still startled at first, still unsure why so many people now knew his name. The room began to fill not just with flowers and cards but with faces. Nurses who came in just to check on him even when he didn't need checking. A janitor who brought him extra pudding and told him he reminded him of his grandson. And once, a woman who cried just from seeing him and whispered something about hope being real again. Malik never quite knew how to respond to any of it. He didn't feel like a hero. He didn't know what heroes were supposed to feel like. All he knew was that he had seen someone in danger, and his feet had moved before his mind could reason otherwise. It hadn't been courage, at least not the kind people talked about on television. It had been instinct, maybe love, or maybe something quieter and more mysterious. What Miss Loretta once called, doing right when no one is watching because your soul won't let you do wrong. And then came the afternoon that changed everything. James Whitmore returned, not alone this time but with Lily in tow, her small hand tucked in his, her blonde curls pinned back with a clip shaped like a bluebird. She clutched something to her chest, something wrapped in paper that looked like it had been folded and refolded many times. They entered the room gently, almost reverently, as though stepping into a sanctuary. Lily approached the bed slowly, shy now, her eyes wide and searching, and for a moment neither she nor Malik said a word. Then, without prompting, she stepped forward and handed him the bundle. I made it for you, she said, her voice soft but steady. Malik peeled back the paper and found a cape, a hero cape, hand-stitched with crooked lines and colorful patches clearly cut from one of her father's old concert t-shirts. Across the back, in glittering glue and uneven letters, it read, My Hero. I didn't know your favorite color, she added quickly, so I just used all of them. Malik looked at the cape, then back at Lily, and for a moment his throat felt too tight to speak. He nodded gently, then reached out his uninjured hand to take hers. She squeezed it without fear this time. There was something unspoken between them now, a thread that bound without needing words. A child's gratitude and another child's sacrifice wrapped together in something sacred. James cleared his throat, then smiled. A real smile, the kind that reached into his eyes and chased out the long-held sorrow that had lived there since his wife's death. We were hoping, he began carefully, that when you're strong enough to leave here, you might consider joining us on stage for something special. He paused, watching Malik's puzzled expression. I've written a song, Malik. About that day in the park, about you. It's not just music. It's a message. People need to hear what it means to act from the heart. Miss Loretta straightened in her chair, her hands still resting protectively on her grandson's arm. "He's never been on a stage," she said gently, not in objection but more like a reminder. James nodded. "Neither had I once." The event was planned quickly, though not rushed. It was to be held in the park, the same park where it all happened, but now with a raised wooden platform, rows of folding chairs and lanterns strung like fireflies overhead. The mayor would attend. So would news crews, local families, church elders and school children. But more than any of that, Malik's classmates came. Some who had barely known him before, some who had never spoken his name. They came because they had heard the story and they wanted to see for themselves the boy who had done something most grown men hesitated to do. When Malik took the stage, guided by Miss Loretta on one side and Lily on the other, he wore the cape proudly, its patchwork fluttering in the warm evening breeze. He didn't speak, not at first. James stood beside him with a guitar in hand, adjusting the mic, then gave Malik a nod, and with the first gentle strum of strings, the world seemed to quiet. The song, titled "The Boy in the Cape," wasn't loud or dramatic. It was slow, deliberate and tender, woven with lyrics that painted Malik not as a myth, but as a child who made a choice when no one asked him to. As the final notes drifted into silence, the crowd stood, not out of obligation, not because they had been prompted, but because something in them recognized truth when they heard it. Malik looked out over the sea of faces, and for the first time he understood what it meant to be seen. Not for what you have or what you wear, but for who you are when the world turns away. And in that moment, with the stars above him and the cape brushing against the backs of his legs, Malik didn't feel like a boy from the margins of the neighborhood. He felt like what Lily had written across her drawing. He felt simply and profoundly like someone who mattered. Join us in sharing meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.